Get the big list, you figure out what you got. You say, okay, I'm going to create little boxes of stuff. Here's my little zone. Here's the things that are going to talk, and here's the things that aren't. I'm not going to allow anything into the zone or minimal amount out. I've got, four things. 1, 2, 3, 4. One talks to two. Two doesn't talk back to one. Three talks to four. Four talks to, get the whole list. You get all the rules. You've written them all down. You get them very, you go through every person you can in the org to say this works, right? Everybody nods their heads. You put it into test mode. You put it into the system the way it should be done in the microsegmentation system. You do the test. You go through your different internal governance processes, and then you finish it up and you say, okay, let's go, and you click the button and it starts microsegmentating. And then you pray that
no one. Off the cliff. Smarter.
This this is the ICS Security Radio Hour half hour with me, Eirc.
And me, Dwayne. And
luckily,
boy, aren't we having fun today?
We're going to get much worse. We're going to get much worse on this one. This is the second part of the, hopefully you watched the first part on microsegmentation and OT, where we delve deep into the wows, the whys, and now the how are you actually going to do it in terms of microsegmentation, right, Dwayne?
Yeah, and look, if you didn't watch the first episode, it's not required, but I think we talked through multiple various ways you can protect OT, and if you didn't watch the first episode, please go back now. I would probably do a handful of references back, but yeah, we'll leave the link in the introduction here.
Yeah, but the first one we talked a little about the history of microsegmentation, and we talked about the theory and the why, right? Now we're going to talk about the how and
some of
the
how
you actually get it done.
So, some of the bad ways of doing it.
Sure. And now we're going to talk about the good ways, right?
Yes, exactly.
So, okay, let's go high level. So here's again, I'm not the expert on this stuff, so I'm going to be educated by you, and you can tell me where I'm wrong. But okay, I want to start a microsegmentation project in OT or in IT in general. Okay, I've got a list of things. I got a bunch of stuff, right? And I've theoretically bought a product that's going to help me do that, right? Hopefully, however it does it, it's going to do it, right? But here's how I think you do it, and you tell me where I'm wrong. You have your list of things. You figure out what you got through whatever tool, right? Hopefully, maybe the microsegmentation thing will help you do that as well. You get the big list. You figure out what you got. You say, okay, I'm going to create little boxes of stuff. Here's my little zone. Here's the things that are going to talk, and here's the things that aren't. I'm not going to allow anything into the zone or minimal amount out. I've got, four things. 1, 2, 3, 4. One talks to two. Two doesn't talk back to one. Three talks to four. Four talks to two. You get the whole list. You get all the rules. You've written them all down. You get them very, you go through every person you can in the org to say this works, right? Everybody nods their heads. You put it into test mode. You put it into the system the way it should be done in the microsegmentation system. You do the test. You say, okay, we're going to look at this. You go through your different internal governance processes, and then you finish it up and you say, okay, let's go, and you click the button and it starts microsegmentating. And then you pray that no one screams, right?
Oh, the gonculator just quit working.
That's right. More importantly, the money machine isn't working.
We quit printing money just like Jaguar and Asahi. So yeah, I mean, in general, I think you gave a pretty vague but accurate statement, right? And I think let's pick that apart at the high level first, because I need to entertain myself. And but we also want to point out just like why. What are the things maybe that some people don't understand about microsegmentation, and probably more importantly is like, to maybe overstate it, why are you afraid of it, right? Because let's just talk about the market in general. I'll give the same caveat I gave yesterday. I work for a company called Color Tokens, right? And we're microsegmentation. So, but just generically, I make a list of my assets. Well, boy, I think I just stopped doing that project and went on to something else because that's bad enough. And the tools in general, obviously, is going to give some sort of list of assets at some level. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then I think the other thing is it can be extremely complex, right? It's an n times n minus 1 problem. Yeah, it is. Now, they aren't all talking together, but yeah, it is a complicated problem. and then you're figuring out how they should talk, and then you're writing these boxes. And so that's the other problem is, well, there's lots of different definitions of boxes. And the classic thing we do in microsegmentation is we use tags rather than things like VLANs. Again, go back to last episode. Tags can build groups that are multivariant, if you will. So they're not necessarily just, hey, this is a subnet and this is the way it talks to a subnet. It's, hey, this is a function and it can talk to other devices in this kind of function. But if you look at Venn diagrams or groups or tags, different devices can belong to different groups and be have protection in various ways. And maybe I'll show you a couple pictures here in a minute to hopefully make that more real. But you get the idea. You
Well,
can
is
belong to
that just
different groups.
because otherwise, if it was easy enough to group things very simply and specifically, you probably could, or
Yeah.
in
I
switches,
mean,
because you just say, hey, don't talk to this,
yeah.
don't talk to this, and be done.
Yeah. I mean, VLANs and firewalls, and again, previous episode, that's macro segmentation, right? That's, hey, these 20 devices, or these 4 devices in your example, these 4 devices can talk to each other how they want, and they talk in and out of the firewall in some very specific ways. But if you look at it, there's always more than 4, right? And I'm more concerned about, what's the bugaboo for everybody is ransomware. I'm more concerned about how ransomware moves in environments, and it uses, the classic operating system level ports and protocols like RDP and SSH and WinRM and whatever horribleness you want to talk about. That's not a thing I would do in a subnet. And so that's, really that's the whole thing of microsegmentation. Group these devices in ways that make sense in arbitrary groups using tags, understand via a software tool what is actually the ports, the protocols, the conversations that are going on, then go down that list and here's where I think a lot of people again are scared, if you will. Go down that list in a prioritized manner and knock off the things that are most harmful to the most valuable stuff, right? I think most people look at just the end state of the problem and think, oh my gosh, I'll never get there. But it's like how do you eat an elephant, right?
Give me an example of that most harmful thing, because theoretically everything's already in your network, right? Again, the firewall's doing the blocking of the bad stuff on the internet, right? Like
Yeah.
I mean, again, right, with a grain of salt, but like, okay, what internally would you be talking about? How would you do that part of it? Because it's getting granular already on that definition.
Yeah. I mean, again, first and we'll talk about this for a minute. It's how do I identify assets, right? The old saw, everybody says it. You can't protect what you don't know about. Well, first, it's just, very simply, the existence, which we may or may not know about, especially in OT, right? There's usually good inventory on IT, or relatively good for a variety of reasons, but maybe not so much on our side of the wall. So the first thing is just listening to the traffic, building the map. And regardless of whether you're talking about, some of the pure play parts of the market, or in our case, or what we're talking about microsegmentation, is I want to collect that data. And now you're going to pause and go on a little bit of a side tour. What are you using the data for? In the pure plays, in many instances, you're looking about vulnerabilities, right? And I don't want to go down the rat hole of when do you patch, how do you patch, what do you do, all that. You as a viewer of the podcast have your own ways of doing that or your own ideas. What it comes down to, though, is in order to patch any vulnerability, you have to have a relatively detailed idea of that asset, including things like firmware for controllers, HMIs, etc., and patch levels for Windows machines, even if they're kind of old. So for those kind of applications and that kind of security, again, which is not what we're talking about today, you have to have an extremely detailed level of knowledge. For microsegmentation, it's pretty different. It's you have to have contextual information, absolutely. You obviously have to understand the device. The one thing in terms of enforcement is Sooner or later, you have to understand how it's talking. So port protocol. So IP address and port. Now, that's going to be tough to go any farther without something else. And the tools in general are going to help you along that journey, if you will. And you might, for example, take information out of naming systems. So whether it's a Windows name, whether it's a DNS name, both of which are short shrift in our environments. Do I understand based on a subnet something about that asset? Is there a CMDB? Is there a ServiceNow, right, where Eirc works? Or is there a poor collection of Excel spreadsheets out there that I can ingest? It's an important part of the step, right? And I realize it is a little bit of a hill to climb, but as you look at how you deploy these things, I don't want people to get discouraged because they only think of the end. You're on mute. Didn't know if you had something to say there.
No, I was just thinking.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. So contextual information is important because it helps you go from something that looks like this, if you will, to maybe something that looks a little better. And these are, Eirc, I had a decent amount of
where'd all the assets go?
Yeah, where'd all the assets go? They're stuck in arbitrary, I use that word in its biggest meaning, they're stuck in arbitrary group based on some bit of information I know. So in this particular instance, I've got a couple things going on. I understand, hey, I've got 4 HMIs, 6 controllers. Am I going to group protection between those groups based on that? No, but it helps me understand what they are. And it certainly helps me understand, hey, controllers should never talk to the internet, but maybe they should talk to a workstation. HMIs may or may not ever talk to workstations or only under very limited conditions. The other thing you see here, just to walk through this super quick, is I have environments like test and prod, more meaningful for IT, but again, you can imagine things I might apply, policies I might apply to those rules. Now, again, it's an example. Probably something that's a little more meaningful is I may have tags that help me understand lines, individual lines in my environment. Or I've got a controller that lives on a line and it can only talk to this historian. Or maybe only Studio 5000 can talk to, these handful of controllers, but not other sites in my environment. Hopefully you get the idea that the idea of tags is so much more flexible than a VLAN, right? And can be built sort of, I won't say on the fly, but can be built in a much more granular and dynamic environment. So that's step one, right? Is just understanding the devices, understanding how they talk, and grouping them into something that fits the way that you have built your security policy or your burgeoning security policy, because this is often iterative, right?
So you got the groups of things. You theoretically know where they should talk and who they should talk to. So what happens next? You just take each of these buckets and pull out the right spots from each one. You pull out HMI number 1, make sure it talks to controller 1. I mean, how, like, at that point, once you know that stuff, how does it work?
Well, I did mention it's iterative. And first of all, and I think this is where visualization may not always necessarily get its full due, but this is where visualization really helps. And so this is just my lab, right? This is another screenshot of the visualizer. But you see here some relatively meaningful things. Now, I've opened up the more IT side of it, but look, that's just an example, is to say, here's a bunch of different servers. They're talking to each other in various ways. And the next thing I want to do is start inspecting. I don't have the screen here listed to help, bear with me here, is start inspecting the conversations. You're absolutely right there.
Okay.
With the thought, and I've got another slide here in a second, but with the thought of what are the things we're most concerned about? We're concerned with ransomware. We're concerned with, the whole idea of microsegmentation is the problem I'm trying to solve by and large is lateral movement within these very large failure domains, or
or just in domains where things shouldn't be coming.
Yeah, yeah.
It's in a very isolated environment where you pretty much should know what's talking to what and what shouldn't talk to what.
Yeah. So regardless, is I'm going to look at those rules and say I want to block things, right? I want to allow certain things. You can think of as port 443, and obviously runs in a lot of places. Maybe not in OT, but it runs in a lot of places. So I may have rules that allow 443 to run all through in this environment. Now, do servers to servers talk that way? Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. So I may want to have rules that block that. So I build some policies and I run them in, I think what everybody's going to understand pretty easily, a test mode, right? So allow all the traffic, but put these policies in place and let them run for some time. And in our particular environment, you see that as green. So there's traffic between these two devices. It's green, so it's obviously allowed. In a test environment, it turns yellow. Hey, I would block this. I would block this traffic. If it were red, that would actually be enforcement. So I won't go down that path too far. But yellow just means I would block these things. Purple means there's traffic going between these two things, some of which is allowed and some of which is blocked. Just give you an idea for the thing.
So how long would this take then? How long would you generally leave these things in kind of a test mode? I mean, in an OT environment, I mean, the communications is relatively expected and not static, but the PLC talks to the engineering workstation, PLC talks to the engineering workstation. It's 1 to 0, 1 to 0, 1 to, it's relatively predictable, right? So
Yeah,
it shouldn't take that long.
it shouldn't take that long. The only things that you sort of don't always catch in OT environments and ICS environments is this left-hand side is, and again, IT, right? But this is the left-hand side is where you have management stuff, and that might be things that understand the health of the environment, but probably more importantly might be your engineering workstations, which are not connecting all the time, or historians, which they probably are connected most of the time.
Well, it's connecting the other way. It's always going out.
Yeah,
right?
And directionality is maybe not quite as important as you think, but it's more of the whole idea of if I look at what you said earlier around how do I prioritize the important stuff? Historians give you great telemetry. They aren't actually involved in, the running of the system. They're not printing the money, so to speak. It's important, but it's not vital to operation. The vital to the operation stuff is in here. And we'll get to that in a minute. So it is really just as simple as I don't know is the answer. But the answer more, useful is you understand the exceptions. You as an engineer, right, an automation controls engineer, somebody's involved in this should understand, there's a handful of exceptions of things that don't talk all the time. But once I've mapped this out over the course of a couple of days, I'm going to get 90% of it. So the visualization and the understanding the controllers and finding them, right? So getting the asset inventory pretty short. What you're probably going to run for longer is the testing, right? So understand what rules I've put in place and understand what's breaking those rules and adjusting those rules. And again, that's your level of comfort, Eric. How long are you going to want that to happen before you feel good?
Sure.
And each one is going to be different based on the
device.
device.
A long time though, right?
Huh?
Certainly, people take a long time because it's nerve wracking a little bit.
It is nerve wracking. But the good news is, hey, I can see them, I can understand them, I can go do my investigation with my, my peers, if you will, and understand these conversations. I guess that's the important thing. And I think maybe the next thing will help a lot too is there's a way to attack this problem also from what's the worst thing? And the worst thing again is lateral movement, whether that's ransomware or something else. It's how do I take those worst ports and protocols, and again, hey, RDP, SSH, WinRM, old NetBIOS, all that stuff. How do I take those things and model this? Right? Again, there's management servers over here talking in here. Those can work RDP. I don't want these guys working RDP. I don't want these working SSH. I don't want 44818 going off the internet. So there's things that using your tribal knowledge is going to make that much easier. And
that brings up an interesting question. Okay, let's
Yeah.
pretend I had NetBIOS in that environment, and I've got it using it, and I know I don't need it. Like at that point, is it better to be segmenting it, or is it better to go into that device and say turn off that functionality, turn off that ability to speak, or is it a combination of both, or is it neither?
Wow, there's a 6-hour conversation, I think. I feel like, and that's probably my background, I'm a networking guy. I feel like it's easier to back out of things like ACLs or microsegmentation. So in other words, I black that traffic. Oh, that was bad. I can unblock it pretty quickly. I go into an operating system, especially an old operating system, and I turn off a service. I'm not sure I'm as comfortable understanding what other effects that has.
Sure.
So, what's your expertise, first of all? And secondly, how does that affect, a program you didn't write? I mean, historians should be relatively straightforward, but maybe there's other pieces. If it's an MES, it might not be as straightforward. So,
It's the old cartoon with the whole tech stack is held up by
yeah.
one guy's little project, right?
Oh, yeah.
Same
So,
thing, I guess. Those.
when you look at that upside down pyramid, and again, it's my specific point of view, I wouldn't do hardening. That's what I think of what you just said is hardening. I wouldn't do hardening without a real complete understanding of how that application works. And then how do I back out of it? If I turn off a service, do I have to reboot the computer? If I have to turn it back on, same thing. There's more variables there. If I block a port, I feel very confident and comfortable unblocking that port pretty quickly.
Yeah, you're not affecting the actual device in the process, I suppose.
And quite frankly, from a political standpoint, who am I going to have to deal with to change that machine? I mean, maybe it's just my peers. Maybe it's the guy who sits down the hall, but maybe it's corporate IT. Yeah, I mean, good issue, good question though. So now, how do I deal with that? And this is the process that my company follows. Obviously, I feel like it's the best one, but your mileage may vary. But again, what I'm discouraging you from is I don't have to make it perfect. I need to start in the simple way and knock down the worst stuff, and then move from there. So in that idea on the left-hand side, and I mentioned this already a little bit, is hey, in my data center or in my ICS environment, I don't want RDP running around. I don't want all these other sort of Windows native protocols and operating system things working. In other words, I don't want RDP to go from one engineering workstation to the next. There's no reason for it. So I want to build rules that only allow management workstations to get in there in OT and IT. I don't want those things. So I can build these sort of coarse-grained rules that I can apply across the whole environment, run them in test mode, and get to a more secure environment very quickly. And I think that's just good advice no matter what you're running. And then secondly, then I can work on the ability for very individualized ring fences or application firewalls in these groups. Maybe you don't ever get all the way there in OT. You might chase that in IT, but the bad stuff doesn't usually vector down. I'm saying this again very broadly. The bad stuff doesn't typically vector down application content. And then lastly, how do I, and this is the problem of, and Dale wrote an article, you see a lot of articles lately, it's like, well, these aren't OT attacks, these are IT attacks that bleed over. Well, yeah, I mean, that's almost all of them, right? I mean, that's, hey, out of an abundance of caution, we shut down the money producer. $2 billion, huh, Jaguar? And I'm not making fun of them. Don't get me wrong there. It's just that's a very high cost of an issue of shutting things down. But as you can imagine, you could test and modify and make these kind of policies that might poorly affect telemetry, right? So in other words, in convergence, I might not be given leadership all the data they want to come out of the factory floor into the environment, but I can make a judgment call to say, hey, I can lift the drawbridge. I can only let so much or maybe no information go in between IoT and OT. So what does that sound like? And keep things running, right? That's the whole idea. Is, hey, bad stuff's happening over here. Fine, pull up the drawbridge, isolate this, let things continue to be produced, and don't worry about it. Now, again, there's setup and testing involved with that, but that's the third. Well, it may in some cases be the second step, not the third step, but it is an environment that I think we can connect with and understand there's value.
Well, certainly find value in that world, because that's what we as an ICS and OT community have said that's the gold standard, right?
Yeah,
The true isolated network operating on its own.
yeah. Hopefully, what I get there is about though is like, look, the things that stop. I mean, microsegmentation may or may not be for you, right? That's sort of the obvious one, but what are the things we are afraid of? I use that very loosely, or concerned with. It's it's not all or nothing, right? It is understanding how the traffic talks to each other. We in a previous lay of life sold a lot of a tool that didn't do any protection, but at least gave the customers all the information they needed, for example, to write firewall rules. So this is the same idea as in a software basis. Understand the traffic, know how things run and work. Do you end up having to do a little bit of legwork? Absolutely. I won't lie to you about that. Of course you do.
Anything would require us.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to lift your burden, right? If I can look at the visualizer, if I can understand the traffic patterns, I can make educated information. I'm sorry, educated decisions about how that works. And that's we're not jumping off a cliff then. We're not doing that scary part. It's like, oh, am I going to break stuff? Do it at the pace that makes you comfortable, one at a time, one
Cell
day
by
at a time.
cell, yeah, group by
Yeah,
group, right?
yeah, yeah.
And that generally, I mean, I assume that generally works out pretty well, right? I mean, what's the worst that happens in that process? I suppose
I mean, you
something
make
gets shut off that
mistakes.
you don't know, right?
Yeah, but
But you can quickly
again,
reverse it.
yeah, understand it. Work at it at a level that makes you comfortable. I say those things. I say those words all the time. Worst thing that happens is, yeah, you break something. Don't try not to do that. And if you're just careful, you don't. Right?
Right.
If you're just careful, you don't.
And if you
It's when
follow
you
the
get in a
process, you
hurry.
probably don't either.
What is the old Navy? I've been saying the old Navy SEAL quote a lot lately: is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Right? If you do it with a little bit of determination and understanding of the environment, you're going to be fine.
Good. I like it. I'm glad to know that I was on the right track, but the detail is the devil in some situations, and I'm glad I learned about it today.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, this has been great, Dwayne. I appreciate it. Part two. I don't think we need a part three, but maybe the audience has specific questions and wants to know real details, and we can do a part three.
That'd be fine with me. But
Or I'll just wake up in the night screaming about microsegmentation, and then we're gonna have to do a third one because I'm gonna forget about something.
there it is.
It's been another half an hour with me, Eric.
Me, Dwayne.
Thanks for joining us on the ICS Security Radio, our half hour. See you later.